Welcome to the webinar. Today's webinar will be on personalized content marketing, creativity, cultural awareness, and the way forward. My name is Priscilla Charles, and first I'd like to start with a little bit of housekeeping today. The webinar will start in a few moments and will be hosted by John Wuebben, CEO at Content Launch, and Michael J. Asquith, Senior Executive, Global Solutions at Vistatec. We will be hosting a Q&A towards the end of the webinar. Of course, in order to ask questions to John and Michael today, simply go to your GoToWebinar panel on your screen, and about halfway down, you'll see a questions box. Simply type your question here, and we'll do our best to answer them in our Q&A. If you're joining us today here live, thanks very much indeed for your time. And if you're listening to this recording, thanks for listening. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Michael J. Asquith.
Thank you so much. I am Michael J. Asquith. I am happy to be here. Good morning. Definitely, I think with kind of to get some background on myself and kind of my credentials in this space, I think it's easiest to be able to kind of go through and say specifically where I kind of came from in being a part of this business and global business, and also having to do with content marketing. Specifically, I've been in global sales marketing leadership roles for 15 years, and I started a long time ago in going to. I was kind of thinking earlier about how I got involved in international business and how I got involved in content marketing and kind of my understanding, especially from a cultural perspective. And I kind of think back to 2005 when I visited Damascus, Syria, which was very crazy back then. I was about 28 years old and was trying to take on or bring on a brokerage firm there, and kind of had the culture shock of getting off the airplane and driving about 100 miles per hour to the main city of Damascus from the airport. So I kind of think back to that kind of initial first kind of step and stage, which really drew me to different cultures and backgrounds. And I've collaborated in cross-cultural work environments now for about 13 plus years. And then previous to working with the very best in Vistatec, which is headquartered in Dublin, I developed market position strategy for two Asian-based LSPs headquartered in Beijing, Mumbai, and Tokyo. So that's my bio. I'm going to turn it over to John, who has actually written a few books.
Well, thank you, Michael. Appreciate that, and happy to be on this webinar with you. So I'm a content guy. I'm a content marketing professional, been in the industry for 15 years. I speak at all the content conferences and have been the content strategist for a number of companies over the years. Just real passionate about content and how we connect with our prospects and our customers. And I graduated from Thunderbird in Arizona about 20 years ago now with my MBA. And the great thing about going to that school was the fact that I was going to school with folks from 70 different countries. It was just an absolutely fantastic experience at the age of 27 to be immersed in the cultural differences that were all around me in my classes. So that really springboarded me into starting in international marketing and then eventually content marketing. So along the way, I've written 3 books, and Future Marketing came out a couple of years ago. That's my latest book, where I really talk about the trends and technologies and the change in consumer behavior that's happened over the last 20 years, and we're going to continue to see that. So yeah, with that, let's get into the webinar. So when we talk about personalization, I think let's really put a point on it. We talk about it quite a bit. We see it talked about, but what does it mean? It's really hard, to approach your customers and your prospects in a personalized manner when you have so many of them. So that's a challenge. But I wanted to put this definition up because I think it's important that we start there, so we really understand what we're talking about. when we say personalization. Content Marketing Institute, this is their definition. And I think it's important to understand where CMI comes in on this. And I highlighted a couple items here in that, content personalization is a strategy that exploits visitor or prospect data, right? There's the data piece. And that's what's enabling us to create this personalized approach, to deliver relevant content based on the interests and preferences of the target audience. So what is it that our audience is interested in? Do we really know? That's really the challenge. So next, we talk about, what are the goals with your content? I think it's important for us to understand, what are we trying to achieve through this personalized content? I love this chart. I found this a couple of years ago. First 10 is where Insights put this together. I use this in just about every presentation I do because it's just so impactful. So you can see at the top, awareness and purchase. On the left side, emotional and rational. And based on where you want to land, there are certain types of content that work more effectively than others based on what you're trying to accomplish. So if you're B2C and you're trying to entertain and engage your audience, doing some competition, some games, some quizzes is a good idea. If you're on the other side of the spectrum, if you're trying to convince your audience, maybe you're in B2B and you really want to close the sale, maybe you're going to provide some case studies or webinars. And obviously, you want to do this in a personalized approach. But I think with every content piece that you do, you want to keep that chart in mind. And of course, there are lots of challenges that we face, right? We all know them, but let's put a point on it and understand what they are. So lack of time, right? Producing the kind of content that engages. There's the personalization piece right there. Lack of budget, producing enough content. I think we get it. There's a lot of challenges with creating content, okay? And then on top of that, making it personalized, that just adds another layer of complexity to it. So this stuff is not easy, right? But no one ever said it was going to be easy. Next slide. So this came from CMI as well as Marketing Profs, and these are the types of content marketing tactics that we see primarily used in B2B, although B2C as well. But I live in sort of a B2B world with what I do, and I think a lot of folks on the call are also B2B. But whether you're B2B or B2C is really not that critical difference. It's here's what's being used, right? Social media blogs, articles on your website, e-newsletters, case studies. So how can we make those personalized, right? That's the question we got to ask ourselves. With social media, it's easier to do that, right? With emails, easier to do that. With the other things like case studies, not as easy, but I think the personalization comes in the follow-up, right? So it may not happen with the initial piece of content that we're pushing out there, but then in the next communication, that personalization can happen. And of course, there's lots of things along the way. These are some of the important areas when we're creating our content marketing mission statement. We talk about a mission statement for our companies. I like to think of a mission statement for our content marketing programs that we do. So planning, right? The audience, the story. What's the storytelling behind the content? And that's where you can really connect with that personalization piece, because you're telling your story, right? Or your company's story, and that's a personal thing. And you can really connect with your audience in the storytelling piece of it. The channels that you're using, obviously that's important. So in my book, Future Marketing, I came up with a new marketing construct. We talk about the 4 Ps of marketing, right? We've used the 4 Ps for the last 50 years. And it's a good tried and true matrix or model for marketing. But I think, in the age of social media, in the age of the more empowered consumer, I call it the prosumer, which is a mashup of producer and consumer. I came up with a new marketing construct. I call it EP squared. And so I came up with this 3 years ago, and there you see it. Personalization is one of them, right? So engagement, experiences, personalization, and passion. That, I believe, is the new construct of marketing. Each of these components focuses on the relationship you have with your prosumer customers. So it's all centered around the relationship. I think in the past, it was probably more centered around the product or the brand and how we deliver that to our audience. But clearly, in an age where the customer has more power in the relationship, we really need to put them front and center. So I think this works well. So transitioning now to kind of the future and where things are going, Personalization is going to be a part of everything we do. And the reason why is because it just makes sense, number one. Number two, that's what our audience is expecting from us. Number three, you're going to be more effective with that individual. Can you go back to that previous slide, Michael? So these are sort of the big ideas when we talk about the next 10 years in marketing. I talk about the prosumer. I mentioned that a few minutes ago. Cultural and technological shifts. We all see new technologies coming online every week, it seems like. So adapting to that and realizing how can we build our marketing stack effectively to enable that personalization. Transitioning from brand messages to multi-sensory experiences. Wow, what's that? Well, you know, experiences is what it's going to all be about, right? So if you can create an experience for your customer or your client, that's going to be the zeitgeist, and that's what's going to be expected. You know, when you take your family to Disneyland, you know, that's an experience, right? That's something we can all look forward to. And why do we look forward to it? Well, we're experiencing with others, right? And we're going to remember that. It's going to be memorable. So if you're, you know, a company out there and you haven't really done any kind of experience type marketing, think about what you could do to transition your products and services to be more experience level. So let's talk about this prosumer a little bit more. So this new consumer, this was all enabled by Web 2.0, right? When social media hit, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, all the rest, it gave us new power. And you know, we're all motivated to seek challenges, discover new perspectives, right? We all want to have that autonomy piece of the equation, right? So prosumers, it's really you know, consumers on steroids, if you will. It's the more influential consumer. I mean, when you look at Facebook, who's creating that content, right? It's not Facebook, it's all of us. And so we're really driving that engine for Facebook. When you look at Amazon, all the reviews, those are done by us, right? Not Amazon. So we're helping Amazon and Facebook produce that experience. So we're producers and consumers at the same time. When we talk about technology impact, these are really the four big ones. So Internet of Things, right? Big data, that's a key piece of the personalization piece. 3D printing, marketing technology. So man, there's a lot of stuff coming at us, right? I think when we talk about personalization though, the two on the right side are really going to enable that, right? So all this data, we've got data points on our customers, you know, 9 different ways, right? We know everything about these folks. And if we don't, we can certainly get that data now. So how you use that data is the key. And that's how you can really create that personalization. And I think, don't think about it, you know, hey, we're using all this data in the first touch or the second touch. You know, think about all the touches that you're going to have with your customers. It could be 20 or 30 or 40 touches in the next 2 years. Use that personalization, you know, when you need to, at the right points, right? Obviously, name, you know, first name is going to be your first data point, and we all love to hear our first name. But there's many other data points that we can use. I think the challenge for a lot of companies right now is they're not using all those points along the way. So there's a lot more data that we can start using in our content. With marketing technology, so that's the MarTech stack, right? Those are all the platforms that you use to get your marketing done. So we're talking about your CRM, and we're talking about your marketing automation platform, and maybe your content platform, and all those things help the personalization become more efficient, right? So when we talk about these experiences, let's talk about that a little bit more. So obviously doing things, right, makes people happier than having things. I used that Disneyland example earlier. There's a number of things we could use there, right? Going to a concert, right? I still remember the first concert I went to in 1987, right? It was U2, the Joshua Tree, and I was lucky because it just happened to be one of the greatest concert tours of all time, and it was my first. But I still remember that, right? Because it was an experience. So the anticipation of an experience, right, versus the anticipation of a purchase. Clearly, there's a difference there. So again, what can you do to create experiences for your customers? Man, what a great opportunity to personalize things, right? They're going to feel that. They're going to feel that personalization because there's so many ways that you can do it with in-person events, for example. I use these three quite a bit when I talk about you know, companies that are really doing well with creating experiences. Bass Pro Shops. If you've ever been in one of these places, my God, the whole store is an experience, right? and they're just huge retail centers for anyone that loves fishing. You know, it's like Mecca, right? REI. I'm not sure if REI is a nationwide chain, but on the West Coast in California, there's a lot of REI locations. It's basically an outdoor, sporting goods retailer. But when you walk in this place, it's just you're immersed in the experience of hiking and biking, and you can get your running tested, and it's just a really awesome experience based retailer. And then, of course, if you've ever been to Seattle, you know, we've all been to Pike Place Fish Market, we've been to Seattle, and they've really made an experience out of just throwing fish, right? And people come just to watch them do it. And so great examples there of how you can create experiences for your customers. So in the future, you know, people are going to buy experiences. So that's why we're talking about it here. And again, really great way to personalize your content and your interactions. So when we talk about content marketing, right, VR is where we're going, right? Virtual reality content, and it's a thing, right? We're if you haven't used the headset, if you've never done it, man, the first time you do, you'll never forget that experience. I tried it a couple of years ago and was just amazed at the experience itself and the fact that you can create some personalization there with VR. So, you know, Audi and Volkswagen, they currently are doing VR test drives. You know, you don't have to go to the dealership to do that. You just can put on your headset and off you run with your new Audi, right? Marriott, same thing. You can check out, you know, hotel rooms across the country, actually anywhere in the world, I believe, using virtual reality. So there's a lot of companies doing this. I think if you're new to it, you know, test it out, see what you can do. With VR content, and you're gonna see that there's a great way to personalize that, and you know, I'm looking forward to seeing how folks on this webinar are gonna do that. Next slide.
Yeah, one of the things I think too, just to kind of continue with the VR sense, is that actually I just saw an article yesterday on Mashable. That was basically, it was very interesting. It was VR, and it was like exercise and how that's going to be the next wave. And it was basically where individuals were putting on the actual, you know, whatever the VR set or whatever it is, your mobile phone, and then being able to exercise, you know, flying around, and it looked pretty cool. And something else, kind of when you were talking about experiences, that comes to mind for sure is like Canada Goose, and how I know one of their main offices or main their main stores actually has like a freezer where you can basically test out you know, the actual coats in, you know, sub-zero temperatures and figure out what works best for you. So I think it's really fascinating, just kind of where we're heading as far as like those experiences are concerned, for sure.
Yeah, and you know, Michael, there's a real opportunity for companies to take a lead on this, because a lot of industries, you know, are still looking for a leader when it comes to testing out VR campaigns and things like that. So it's sort of the wild west right now. And if you're a company out there that's sort of forward thinking, it's a real opportunity to try it out and see what you can do with VR content.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to continue on with kind of the tech space and kind of technology and how it's kind of impacting content marketing and personalized content, I definitely think, you know, I think of, you know, I think of chatbots, but I think of, you know, in my space, multilingual chatbots, and kind of how those things can really impact a customer's experience, especially in different locales and for different markets. And you know, I think that there's a lot of things, you know, like machine learning and automation that are contributing to these, you know, to make people more culturally aware and have more multilingual experiences. And I think now it's just become more of the norm. And when you're not kind of doing it, then you're kind of missing out on market share for sure. So I think that kind of brings, you know, to the next kind of area with the big famous buzz category of AI and automation, and how, you know, it can be utilized to free up marketers and other folks to you know, not be doing the routine tasks, and instead, you know, enable them to be more productive and focus on creative work. And I think that, for me personally, I think is is very exciting. And anytime you can use automation or AI in any particular kind of sequence when it comes to developing content or whatever it is, I think it's just going to allow people to focus more on things that take more brain power for sure. So I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, and I wanted to show these books because when we talk about charting the course of the future and really enabling personalization, these 4 books are incredible, and I recommend everyone on the call to take a look at least one of these. My favorite of these 4 was The Inevitable by Kevin Kelly, just an unbelievably great book. I couldn't put it down. So if you're looking to kind of be forward thinking and be on the cutting edge of your marketing, take a look at these books. Just fantastic across the board. So we've obviously been talking about the way forward so far. What else we got, Michael?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and I think it's something to kind of keep in mind throughout the rest of this webinar for sure. So moving on to kind of emotional and visual content, and how emotional and visual content is engaging audiences. So I think that there's this with everything going on, the big situation here is really customer experience. And I actually think it's more, instead of just personalized marketing content, I actually think it's more personalized content is multidimensional, and that meaning from beginning to end, as a customer goes through the journey with whatever company that they're working with or buying from. I think that that can play a big role in kind of how they feel about a brand from beginning to end, and we're seeing that, I think, more and more in more of a 360 kind of multi-dimensional kind of way. I'm seeing that more and more, especially with socially responsible companies, and making sure that they stand for different things, and then aligning their internal corporate culture to so that it properly resonates out to their target audiences and personifies who they are. So I think that is really kind of exciting as far as like the global and cultural principles defining effective marketing content and effective content in general. So we kind of talk a lot about customer experience these days. It's another big buzzword, but I think that there's so many different levels to that, especially on the kind of user experience level, and just kind of, as I mentioned, just going through the customer journey and kind of how everything's kind of impacted. And then I think when thinking about content development and personalizing content, I think imagery plays a big part in that. Anything that is going to create some kind of emotional response is we're seeing that a lot with brands, and just kind of the direction that they're going. And I always kind of think about a campaign specifically from a particular company that did a whole campaign on something called they did it on childlike imagination. And so I thought that it was really fascinating how they use that to really kind of pull at the heartstrings for the individuals that are actually seeing the content. And then, I think that plays in part with what a lot of people might know as the golden circle concept or methodology. And this right here, this next kind of slide here, kind of takes you through what the golden circle is for those who don't know. It's really pretty typical in terms of, pretty much everybody knows what their organization does, or they should know what their organization does, the products that they sell, etc. How they do that is really important, and these things that make them special or set them apart, or that are differentiators. And then the why is the part that a lot of people or a lot of companies struggle with, and a lot of internal folks also struggle with. And so the whole idea behind the golden circle and the way that content is developed it really has it going from the inside out rather than the outside in. And so kind of, I kind of mentioned this childlike imagination situation. It was an old GE campaign, and the brilliant part about the campaign in general was it takes you through, if anybody remembers, there's like these illustrations of a plane flying with wings, and it has like but it's all from like a child's imagination, and then at the end it just says my mother happens to work at GE. So it kind of flips it and doesn't make it all about just delivering the services or the products in the situation. So I think that storytelling is really important, but emotional storytelling and being able to adapt that from a cultural perspective is really, really imperative to the whole process when it comes to personalized content. So what is the why in every situation? I gave an example having to do with like the GE campaign. I've seen it more and more with like, the recent Microsoft commercial where there was the translation, and then there's the heartwarming thing where the little girl sees that her mother is able to talk to someone in Japan, through basically this automation of translation. But then, and then she tries to do it with the reindeer, if anybody saw that during the holidays. I think that is a really good example of the golden circle and how it kind of works. And so kind of a, shameless plug here, but, with Vistatec services, just using this as an example, this is just kind of like a high level view of what Vistatec services are. Now, everybody sees this, they say, yeah, that's great. These are great services. These are great solutions. But again, what is the why? Like, what is the end result? How is it overcoming obstacles or solving a problem for a client in a particular situation? So, I'm just going to kind of use this kind of next image to kind of tell a little bit of kind of a story, because here are universal content and imagery that evokes an emotional response. It's like I said, I think that it really resonates and people remember it, and that's what makes it so valuable. So in this particular case, instead of the last slide that I showed you that demonstrated Vistatec services, I might, in this particular case, if I'm going to be just a little bit creative here, I say Vistatec empowers global thought leaders with dynamic content solutions so they themselves may draw their own wings to fly. So it makes it all about the client, which that's what really we stand for, but it also is able to do that in a much more, in my opinion, effective manner, because people are able to understand the end result and how and why and what we're kind of doing for the client, et cetera. So yeah, that's you have any kind of thoughts, I guess, on that, John, just from your kind of perspective in that situation, or having to do with emotional content or kind of those types of things?
So Michael, I think that that's one miss for a lot of companies is really targeting or connecting with the emotional component of what makes us all human. I think that we all are moving pretty fast, and we always have a number of initiatives that we're working on at any given time. But I think it's important that we interface with our clients on a one-to-one level to really understand what drives them, what is their why. Why are they doing business with us? Why are we in business? But also, why are they choosing to work with us? I think it's the intersection there that we really need to understand. So yeah, it's not that hard, right? We do it in our personal lives with friends and family. We're able to connect on an emotional level with them. So I think it's a really good way of kind of taking that and applying it to our professional lives. So I'm glad you brought it up, because it's not talked about enough, Michael.
Yeah, that's great, John, and that kind of segues kind of into this incorporating culture and global thinking to diversify its impact. And what that kind of means in this sense is there's all these little elements that make up culture, right? Beyond just language, a lot of considerations, of course, as we become more and more advanced, and there's more things that are going on, obviously online, and people are becoming more familiar with different cultures and different brands that come from different locales. There's all these different elements to take into consideration when thinking about culture and content development and personalizing that content. And one of the biggest things that I think is really obvious in a lot of cases is really color. And so there's the kind of analytical side of the brain, and then there's the other side of the brain, and color really kind of impacts whether it's subconsciously or whatever the case is. It still has a lot of place, not only from how you feel, but also in different cultures, different colors mean different things. And so, you can see here that from a psychological point of view, the colors in this regard, like, you'll see here, like the gold kind of color, if you can kind of make this out, is more optimistic and gives clarity and warmth. And then, then you can go to the red, where it's, more excitement and more bold, and then blue, more trust and strength, and then of course gray was balanced and more neutral. And so in cultures, this is part of it as well, but then there's also this idea of just different colors meaning different things in different locales. So for example, red in Asia, in China, is extremely is a big color. It means a lot of things. It's basically it's luck and fertility and just all these great meaningful things in China as an example. And then, but in North and South America, it symbolizes passion and love and things like of that nature. So there's that, and then there's other colors like blue and the differences, or like white can mean death in some cultures, but it can also be a very positive, amazing thing, whereas black can do the same thing. And so I always think of cases where, like in the financial industry, when red numbers are up, that's bad when we see that. But in China, I don't, matter of fact, I don't even know, but I'd have to check the markets. I always wonder it privately, if when it's negative, if it's still at red. I really highly doubt it. So those are just different things to kind of take into consideration that are real simple when personalizing content, and also the images that are associated to that personalized content. So I think that is something really, really important, and very, very simple as well. So one of the other things I was kind of thinking about before this webinar was little things when you're talking to individuals, even when you're talking in English, when you're talking to somebody in Japan, the polite ways is always to say Yuko-san, or something like along those lines, just to show that you're actually that you're not good friends, that you don't know each other that well. It's more formal, but it's more respectful as well. So I think that that's really important as well. And so this kind of goes to the next slide and image here, which is G-local cultural considerations. And so I think more and more there's a lot of cultural considerations for sure, but there are a lot of universal things going on as well, and a lot of things that certain markets are becoming a little bit more advanced in. When I think of that, I think of pop radical brand activism. So that is becoming very, very big, as I kind of touched on, with companies standing for certain things and showcasing that through their content, so that there's this more 360 view of who they are. And then performative downtime is another consideration from a cultural perspective that people have to consider when they're targeting certain markets, or they're working cross-culturally, that in Asia, everybody kind of touts balance universally in the world, but in Asia, balance is a completely different thing, and maybe they're used to being overworked or working too much, or so balance to them might be an hour of downtime. So all these little things play a part in kind of the content as it's being personalized for a target market in those particular spaces. And so one thing that I think of, and I think of this story because I found it fascinating in general, and it's kind of embarrassing that I even know this much about Kim Kardashian, but there was Kim Kardashian had a line of clothing out that was like or shapewear clothing that she called kimono, and there was quite an uproar about it. Obviously, her people didn't do enough market research when they went and made this name for her shapewear clothing, and a lot of people in Japan became extremely offended by it. And after kind of researching it even more myself, because obviously I know that the kimono is an important part of Japanese culture. I really didn't even realize how important it is in Japanese culture, and that there's meaning behind everything that is within the garment itself. So the color from the images that are on the actual garment, showcasing history and kind of cultural change throughout their history. I think that in itself shows how ignorant it was for Kim Kardashian to have called her shapewear clothing, which doesn't look anything like a kimono, to call it kimono. I think it was like intimates or something like that. But now she did go back and had this huge PR problem and then changed the name to Skims, but not before losing millions of dollars. So there's a lesson to be learned there for sure, and I think that that's extremely important when it comes to personalizing content and also doing basic market research when you're globalizing your sourced content, whether that's English or any other language. So that kind of brings us to globalizing customer experience and user experience, and what that kind of means in the grand scheme of things. So how globalizing quality content is contributing to an enriched customer experience. So I've touched on a few of these things, and actually there's a lot of overlap to what John was describing as well, because I think that first and foremost, the content should try to be globalized in itself, but if it's not, then it needs to be culturally adapted and gelocalized so that it's properly translated as well. So I think that that's really important for customer experience. We talk about things that are like the multilingual chatbots, getting back to that, where it's kind of the norm now that people expect to be able to communicate in their language and talk about the things that are most important to them. And so those things are all different considerations that have to be made. So I think that again goes back to customer journey. And if you're thinking about it at every level and you're seeing it in these different layers, it happens from everywhere from awareness and consideration, purchase retention, and then advocacy. So all these things along the way, as content is being personalized, has to be considered when globalizing that content and preparing it properly for overseas target markets. And then making sure that the content is interactive and in order to enhance the user experience. So we're seeing that a lot where with different apps that are out there for sure, and then we're seeing that with the way that people are interacting with brands even after purchasing the product or service as well. So I think that that's a really interesting area that we're going in as well. And then kind of going with this, and this is just thinking about why this is so important when we think about culturally adapting content and also doing that and then gelocalizing it or translating it as well. I think that there's some really good statistics out there, and this is according to CSA, which is an independent research company, and that this is like one that I thought was really fascinating, and this has to do with content specifically, is that the businesses registered an increase in content volume were 2.5 times more likely to experience a growth in profits from one year to the next, and they were 1.8 times more likely to report revenue growth. And that businesses that expanded their translation budgets were 1.5 times more likely than their Fortune 500 peers. So this, to me, in itself tells you how important it is, especially with most folks, multinational companies, really targeting so many different locales. I saw like a recent thing that showed that the U.S. companies are usually targeting about 8 to 10 on average, and that the ones in Europe and Asia are even more. So they're more like 12 to 15. So just imagine how many different kind of versions of content is needed in order to really provide that customer experience that customers expect. And that's why the content needs to be personalized specifically. And this other kind of quote and statistic here is a Fortune 500 company that translates to keep up with or gain an edge is 2 to 4 times more likely to have an increase in profits. So it really is the norm these days, especially if you're trying to wrestle away some market share, that these things are personalized, and part of that personalization is being extremely knowledgeable and aware of basically, I think the biggest thing is thinking about what not to do, or is an easier kind of way to kind of approach it. It's kind of impossible to know all of the cultural nuances for a target market, but you should definitely be making sure that before you kind of prepare your content for that market, that you go ahead and that you know exactly what could be confrontational or something that could be considered a problem. So yeah, on my end, that's really it, and I think that at this particular point, I don't know, John, I know we have a few minutes and we want to leave some time for questions, but did you have any kind of additional kind of comments or any other thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. And a lot of great points there that echoed much of what I said earlier. But I think the other point that I wanted to drive is based on that last slide that you showed. The one thing that we all need to keep in mind is that over the last 20 years, we've seen many emerging economies across the globe. Whether we're talking about India or China or a number of other countries. That's been a really interesting development, and that will continue. So it makes sense. It makes economic sense for us to be a little more global in our thinking with our content, and whether we need to translate content or not. There's a real opportunity for greater personalization, but we just need to be aware of those cultural issues, like you mentioned. So all these emerging economies, I think there's a huge opportunity, right, for American companies, Canadian companies, any company where you're doing business just in one country, and there's a lot of companies like that. Challenge yourself a little bit, because there's a huge opportunity here, and let's not waste it.
Yeah, I think too, John, just the last kind of point on that too is I think with all a lot of companies now with different offices all over the world, they should, in my thinking, they should really take advantage of the melting pot of employees that they have that have come from different perspectives that can really add some value and some emotional kind of integrity to things, and really really kind of stem from like invaluable experiences that they've had to really help personify the brand even further. And I think that that will also help a lot with the personalization and kind of the universal globalization of the content that they're developing.
Yeah, and I think, Michael, that when we're talking about personalization, going international or having a global mindset is really the ultimate challenge when it comes to personalization, because we want to personalize it, but we also, as we've said many times, be culturally aware. right? And so that can be a little tough sometimes. And we've seen, big brands over the years make some mistakes along those lines. So it's just something that we really need to be aware of when we are going down that personalization road, that we first and foremost think about those cultural considerations and see what we can do to really put ourselves in their place. And if we have employees in our companies who are from those countries that we're doing business with, talk to them, right? Because like you said, that's probably the easiest way to really understand. Before you put that content out there, it's got to be sort of vetted, if you will. But hey, it's a good thing to have that challenge, and so we're living in very good times, right?
Absolutely. No, thanks, John. And I guess we could, Priscilla, you're still there. I think we can kind of go to probably questions at this point.
Great.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much, first of all, John and Michael, for a fantastic presentation, very insightful. So we do have a number of questions, and the first question is for John. So John, we would like to know, how do you see any trends emerging in 2020 in comparison to the past few years?
Yeah, that's a question I get asked a lot. And because I wrote a book called Future Marketing, I should have the answer, right? I see something emerging that maybe isn't always talked about, but there's a lot of companies out there that are kind of missing the fundamentals. I sometimes use the metaphor of blocking and tackling in football. Got to get the basics done in order to get the ball over the into the end zone. So sometimes we have the best intentions with our campaigns, but we miss some of the obvious things. So I think one of the trends is that we see, surprisingly, is more companies are going to be doing in-person events and more, talking to their customers on the phone, and not having a call center do that, but actually have folks at the corporate headquarters do that. So that's something that I didn't really see coming, but we're seeing more embracing of that. The other thing too, more in line with what I spoke about earlier, is really adopting that MarTech stack approach, and finding out what technologies, what pieces of the technologies you need to really bring that automation and personalization to the fore and make it easier for your company. So a lot of companies are using, CRM, and maybe they're using an email client, and maybe they're using a project management tool, and that's it. I think there's a real opportunity for companies to use maybe 20 to 30 different platforms, depending on what they're trying to accomplish, to increase that level of personalization. So we're going to see a lot more of that in 2020.
Great, thank you so much, John. I do have a question for Michael now. Michael, you talked about the context of multi-dimensional personalized content. How do you see this developing further over the next 5 years?
No, I think that's a great question. I think that what I've kind of noticed, at least a little bit, is that I think a lot of companies are really listening to their clients more, and listening to what what is most important to their clients, and therefore that they're plugged in, or the clients seem to be more plugged in to helping to personalize that content. And so I think over the next 5 years, I think that we're going to see that even more so. I mean, we see that already, things, customer shaping brands. So I think that we'll see that even more over the next 5 years, is that they will be the driving force to what brands become. And you're seeing that with, kind of personalization of shoes, or you're seeing it with, kind of clients making suggestions, or customers making suggestions of certain things that they'd like to see within a product or a service. And so that's helping to kind of steer companies into developing a more personalized approach, and really kind of hitting home with their clients. I think that answers the question anyway. John, do you have any kind of take on that?
I think you captured it right there.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, John.
Yeah.
Now, I have one more last question for the both of you. How do you see the role of humans in the future of AI, VR, AR when it comes to cultural awareness with personalized content?
Yeah, so AI, I talked a lot about that in my book, Future Marketing. So I think some folks out there have a negative perception of AI. They think, oh man, I'm going to lose my job, or I'm going to be outsourced. Or I think the way we need to think about AI is that AI is your friend. It's your assistant. It's going to be helping you with the tasks that you maybe don't want to do, the more mundane, the more monotonous tasks, right? So AI is a thing that's going to be very positive. Right. And we also talk about in the future all these industries and companies going away, but at the same time, there's going to be new industries and new companies pop up, just like we've seen in the last 40 years, right? I mean, in 1965, did we ever see a company like Apple existing? No, we didn't. So I want to make sure everyone keeps that positive frame of mind. So with AI and any of these new technologies, we need to go in with both feet forward and with a positive and optimistic viewpoint, because I think if we do that, we're going to get the most out of it. So that's it's more of a, I guess, philosophical bend on it. Michael, I don't know what you think.
Yeah. What can you kind of just repeat like the question again? I know it was specifically about AI and VR, but
Yeah, no problem. So how do you see the role of humans in the future world of AI, VR, AR when it comes to cultural awareness with personalized content?
yeah, I mean, I think that we touched on it a bit, and John hit the nail on the head. Is that yeah, I think it's really I mean, first of all, people are able to test things out, as he mentioned with like Volkswagen or some others doing kind of that virtual experience where they can kind of test drive or kind of have that experience. But I think that too, like he said, I don't think it's a threat. The more and more everybody should be at least reading. I mean, it should just actually enhance what people can do, and that to me is what's most exciting about virtual reality and artificial intelligence. Period. I think people too, when it comes to like effective marketing content or content in general, they really should. I think people really need to find their kind of passion, their take on things, and be able to demonstrate or illustrate that experience to the end user. Again, going back to kind of the why. So I think with VR and AI and all the other things that are kind of going on, it's only going to make things better. It's going to make people more informed. And then they're just going to be, I think, also a lot more dedicated to a brand as well because of the experiences that are being offered. So it just makes it very multidimensional for sure.
Yeah, it's going to make things easier in a nutshell. It's how we use the technology, right? That really is the question. But if you've got more technology at your disposal to connect with folks in a very culturally aware way, in the end, it's going to make things easier for you. So that's a very positive story to tell.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Oh, sorry, Michael. Go ahead.
No. I just wanted to make sure there wasn't. I'm amazed we actually have some extra time here. So I'm like, if there's anything else that we can kind of delve into further, I'd be more than open to do so.
Well, if we didn't get an opportunity to answer any other questions, I believe we can answer them post webinar. But if you'd like to add anything, of course, you're welcome to.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks so much, John. And yeah, any questions that anybody has, afterwards, obviously our emails are up there and our phone numbers are up there. So please don't hesitate to reach out.
Absolutely, agreed.
Thanks so much, Michael. Thanks, John. It was a fantastic presentation and discussion today. And if, of course, as I was saying, if you didn't get an opportunity to answer any of your questions today, we'll endeavor to answer all of them after the webinar. So I think I'll hand you over to Michael for a quick summary, and we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, no, just really summarizing, I just think that there's just all these different layers, obviously with personalized content and personalized content marketing. And I just think those different considerations are really important to really enrich experience, you know, whether it's user experience or just the in general, the customer experience. So I think that those things really need to be driven home. And I think that a good way to do all that too is, you know, is to do as much dazzle and think about kind of your end user as much as possible. And I think, you know, when you're able to do that and you come across as genuine, which I think is extremely important, then I think you know, the sky's the limit. And I think that's where companies, you know, truly develop into you know, multinational brands.
Thanks, Michael. So if you want to go back to and listen to today's webinar, of course, the recording will be made available in the coming days on the Vistatec.com website. Thanks again. Thank you so much to Michael and John for a fantastic presentation today and discussion. And thank you, everyone, for coming today. This webinar has now come to a close.